Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome and I'm here to break down UFC 296, which goes down this weekend at the T-Mobile Arena in Vegas. It's a stacked pay-per-view, 2 championship fights, the welterweight championship, the flyweight championship on the line. It's also a box office pay-per-view in the UK as well. I think that's just because we've got that UK welterweight champion in Leon Edwards headlining the card. It's also the final event of the year, which, man, it seems only like 2 minutes ago. We're at the start of January. This year's flown by. It's been a great year of fights. And like I said, we're now finishing it with UFC 296, which is stacked top to bottom, 14 fights. I'm excited for the main event. I'm excited for the co-main event. I'm excited for a lot of fights on this card. Like I said, it's a stacked pay-per-view. It's great for betting from a betting perspective as well, in my opinion. So yeah, looking forward to breaking it down and getting into it. But just before we do that, remember, MMAplay365.com. If you do want any of the betting advice, we've got different subscriptions. A next event subscription, if you just want the one event for $4.99. We've got monthly options, annual options. We've got a dog of the week, which is only $1.99 for 2 underdogs. If both underdogs lose, we give you your money back anyway. And then included in that, we've also got the Tape Index. We've got the Tape Index Plus as separate products. If you're a gambler yourself, you don't want the betting advice. If you're a gambler yourself and you just want to have that tool to help you tape study and analyze and make your bets for this event, then make sure you check out the Tape Index and the Tape Index Plus as well. And it's been a fast and furious start to the podcast. We're going to continue that. We're going to get straight into the breakdowns right now. And of course, we start with that main event, as always, the UFC Welterweight Championship between Leon Edwards and Colby Covington. It's interesting, Colby Covington is finally getting that title shot without having to fight and beat Kamaru Usman, so it's going to be a different look for him, and it's, in my opinion, a much more winnable fight than Kamaru Usman. Now, the one thing I'm going to mention straight off the bat is, and I'm pretty sure I have mentioned this before, every now and again you'll get these MMA math triangles where one fighter is a bad stylistic matchup for another, and then that fighter's a bad stylistic matchup for somebody else, and basically how it works out is that you've got these triangles where one fighter is not necessarily beating another fighter and then the other fighter's beating the other fighter, but stylistically is difficult fights. So I'll give you the example here that we've got. So I think that Leon Edwards is a bad stylistic fight or bad stylistic matchup for Kamaru Usman, hence why he has beaten him twice. I know the first fight was, he was down and then there was the headshot dead knockout in the 5th round, but then in the next fight after that, you really did see Leon Edwards prove to be not an easy fight for Usman. But then I think that Usman is an absolute nightmare stylistic matchup for Colby Covington with the way Colby fights. And I kind of feel Colby might be difficult for Leon Edwards. So this is what I mean. I'm not saying we are absolutely going to get this, but it could be one of those scenarios where Usman beats Colby, Leon beats Usman, but then Colby beats Leon. And like I say, we do see it every now and again. In regards to the analysis of this fight, I think that, look, it's no secret Leon Edwards is going to be the better striker here, but I don't think it's going to be like light years better. I think that Colby Covington has got some underrated striking, maybe not from a technical perspective, but just being efficient, coming forwards, landing volume. And like I say, when it comes to judges and the scorecards, they're not looking for clean strikes. They're not looking for technique. They're looking for strikes that land. So sometimes the less technical striker, a fighter that might be a bit of an ugly striker, to be honest, in regards to the quality of what they're producing with, the hands and the kicks and the combinations, the judges don't care about that. And sometimes, like I say, that less technical striker, as long as they're putting leather on their opponent's body, face, legs, then, that's what scores. So Colby Covington, although he's not as clean of a striker as Leon, he's efficient. So although I do expect Leon to still be the better striker, I don't think it's going to be light years ahead because of what I've just mentioned about the volume with Colby. And the other thing with Colby as well, that forward pressure in the pace, I just think that that's pretty unmatched in the division. Like, not many fighters are going to be able to put that type of pace and pressure on an opponent for a full 25 minutes, which is what Colby does. So From the striking perspective, I think that, yeah, it's close, slight edge with Leon. Now, when you start looking at the wrestling, I do think that Leon it's going to be one of these fights where, look, if Colby's relentlessly wrestling, which I do expect him to do in this fight, I think if he doesn't, he'd be doing himself a disservice. I think he takes Leon Edwards down at will. The problem is, I think Leon gets back up at will as well. So what you're going to have is you're going to have a potential fight here where, we're seeing 7, 8, 9, 10 takedowns completed, but then Leon's getting up every single time. Now, damage could play a factor here. So if Leon's doing more damage on the feet to Colby and then Colby's just rinsing and repeating the takedowns, then it's going to make the fight very close. Where it becomes a problem, and we see this with other fighters, again, I use this as an example all the time, like Merab Dvalishvili. So with Merab, and the same with Covington as well, once you start hitting those big numbers of like 3-4 takedowns per round, it then starts being very difficult to score damage coming back from the opponent, because the damage is going to be minimal if there's plenty of takedowns. So the control time is going to be there for the fighter shooting the takedowns. And like I say, once they start getting dumped with regularity on the mat, even if they're getting back up, the judge is going to see that as, some form of dominance from the wrestler. And that's where it's going to become a little bit of a problem. And this is where I think Leon Edwards is going to run into problems as well, because I do think that Colby's going to be relentless here, and he's got the cardio to do it for a full 25 minutes. And even in the moments where where Colby isn't shooting takedowns, I think Leon's going to be very mindful and very aware that a takedown could come at any moment, and it might just cause some hesitation on his side striking, which will allow Colby to come forward some more, land some strikes himself, back Edwards up, and then shoot on him on the cage. So I do think it's going to be very close. And look, if Colby is only landing 1 or 2 takedowns per round, then Leon is probably going to start getting ahead with the strikes, with damage. But I just feel that Leon hasn't faced a wrestler or a fighter with that relentless pace like Colby Covington. And yes, he's fought and beaten Usman twice. Leon Edwards has, and obviously is the champion because of that. But Usman is a very different fighter and a very different wrestler to Colby. Like, Usman's got good wrestling, but he's not relentless with it. He doesn't come at 100 miles an hour. He doesn't put the pace and pressure that Colby puts on. The reason Colby has trouble against Usman is because Usman's got that high-level wrestling, and also power is a bit of an equaliser as well, and Colby got hurt a couple of times by Usman over their 2 fights. So that's the reason why Colby can't beat Usman. The level of wrestling's tough. It's hard to really get anything going against Usman from a wrestling perspective, because he's so good as a wrestler himself that he's great defensively. Whereas Leon, although he's a good defensive wrestler, he's not the level of Usman. So I do think that this is where you get the stylistic differences. I think that, like I've already said, it's going to be a close fight. I think it's going to be competitive, but I just cannot look past the pace and the relentless pressure that Colby puts on fighters. And now he's not fighting a beast wrestler like Usman. I think he's going to get back to winning ways and going to be able to smother an opponent here like he's done previously. So for those reasons, I'm picking Colby Covington to win the fight and become the new UFC welterweight champion. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, we've got another title fight, this time in the flyweight division. We've got a rematch as well. It's Alexandre Pantoja versus Brandon Royval 2. So these guys met, I think it was 3 years ago. It was an exciting fight, as you can imagine. Most Pantoja fights are exciting, and you can say the exact same with Brandon Royval. And how that fight played out was very interesting. So Pantoja got his wrestling going very early. He was on the back of Royval, but what you actually saw from Royval is something that you don't see from many other opponents that Pantoja has the back of. And that's, scrambling out of positions, rolling out of positions, Granby rolling, causing chaotic scrambles and trying to just force your way out, leg lock attacks again to try and sweep and reverse positions. So it's something you don't really see a lot from opponents that Pantoja has the back of, and the reason why is because the level of grappling Pantoja's just light years ahead of. But with Brandon Royval, it was different. Now, in the second round, Brandon Royval started coming back a little bit better. He was looking much better as well. I think he had some top control time himself. And then the fight stood back up, and he showed his back. I think it was a spin attack, or it might have just been, as a defensive movement. But he showed his back at one point, and Pantoja took advantage of it, took the back, and then choked him out. But Brandon Royval was actually coming back into the fight prior to that lack of concentration, that one moment where he did make an error and a mistake. So there's certainly something there for Brandon Royval in this fight. Now, the thing is with Pantoja, he starts very fast, and I bet him against Brandon Moreno as a big underdog, or at least a moderate underdog, and obviously cashed there. And I kind of was worried after the first couple of rounds that he was going to tire out because of the pace that he puts on early. Now, credit to Pantoja, he didn't tire out to the point where he couldn't function in that fight, otherwise he would have lost to Moreno. But he did slow down significantly. And this is where I think that if Brandon Royval can get past a couple of rounds here, he might start giving himself a chance of winning this fight, because I think that Royval fights at such a pace that Pantoja's going to have to match it. And I do think that Brandon Royval has got the better cardio going down the stretch. He just doesn't seem to tire like Pantoja tires. And Brandon Royval goes fast and hard in every fight. So I do think there's a cardio edge with Brandon Royval. I think if anyone in the division can sort of remain safe and counteract the grappling of Pantoja in the division, it's probably Brandon Royval, just because he's so tricky and such a high-level grappler himself. I do think that Pantoja's the better wrestler, and this, in my opinion, is the reason why he's the favourite in this fight, because when you're looking at Royval crashes forwards into the pocket whilst he's striking, reckless striking, and he doesn't care if the fights hit the mat, because he'll be able to scramble or reverse a position and get, into a dominant position himself. And he almost uses that crashing into the pocket as, I'm not going to say it's a takedown because it's not, but he almost uses it as a takedown because the fight will end up on the mat and that's where he wants to be. Whereas he doesn't offensively wrestle himself. So Pantoja's probably got more chance of getting on top of Royval in those early moments, and that's going to be scary for Royval, because you don't want Pantoja on top of you early in the fight. But this is what I'm saying. I feel like if Pantoja comes out fast and hard, which I expect him to, I think he's going to have some great moments early. And look, maybe he does get Royval out of there early again, but I kind of feel like history isn't going to repeat itself with that. I do think we're going to see a slightly longer fight here. I do think that the striking of Royval is going to give himself opportunities to get at Pantoja. Both fighters here are hittable, so both are very beatable in my opinion. Royval's been hurt on previous occasions, but Pantoja just doesn't move his head when he comes into the pocket. He's all offense, no defense, and I think Brandon Royval can crack him back as well. We've seen Brandon Royval, what he can do with, the variety of strikes he's got in his arsenal. The knockout of Mateus Nicolau was absolutely insane, a perfectly timed knee. So Brandon Royval's really leveling up his striking as well. So like I say, I think this is a fight that's going to be a little bit unpredictable. We're going to have crazy scrambles. It's going to be fast paced. We're going to see both fighters really digging into that gas tank. Both fighters will be super offensive striking. Both fighters lack a little bit defensively as well. So I think it's going to be one of these unpredictable fights. I've just got a funny feeling it's going to be Brandon Royval's night, though. I think that, like I say, he's going to have learned a lot from the loss that he took against Pantoja last time. But like I said, where Pantoja's great, Brandon Royval is very good as well. And like I've already mentioned, if any fighter in the division can neutralise that attacking, grappling threat of Pantoja, and maybe even go that one step further in reverse positions and then look good from a grappling perspective themselves, I just don't think there's any other fighter in the division that could do that to Pantoja like Brandon Royval. And over 5 rounds, I think that Brandon Royval, his cardio should be a little bit better the longer the fight goes on as well. So I for sure think there's going to be a storm to weather for Brandon Royval, but I do think he gets through that storm this time, and the longer the fight goes on, I think he starts looking better. I am going to be siding with Brandon Royval here to win the fight and become the new UFC flyweight champion. And in the next fight, we've got Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Rakhmonov getting a really big step up in competition here, and it's actually quite a fun fight. I feel that, look, Stephen Thompson has got every possibility of winning any fight that he's in, just because he's that high level of a striker. And even though Rakhmonov's an absolute beast, he's a savage, I don't think he'll have ever faced a striker like Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. And the fact that this is 3 rounds, it's going to be interesting because Rakhmonov might come into this fight thinking that he's going to steamroll Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. And then I think Wonderboy might throw some surprises to Rakhmonov in regards to the level of striking and how he strikes and just that awkward style and the fact that Wonderboy is very difficult to get reads on and deal with. And I actually think for a moment it's going to pause Rakhmonov maybe for a couple of minutes, maybe even for a round, to the point where he's like, right, I need to get my reads and I need to, figure out how I'm going to beat Wonderboy Thompson. And I think those early moments might be a bit of a surprise to Rakhmonov, I'll be honest. But the thing is, I just struggle seeing Rakhmonov losing this fight just because he's got more ways to win. And he's super dangerous as well, the pressure he puts on. And that might be what he does against Wonderboy. If he can't match him from a skill set and a technical striking perspective, I think Rakhmonov is just going to come into the pocket. I think that Wonderboy can be dangerous, but I don't think Rakhmonov is really going to get hit with anything that's going to cause hesitation and, make him wary of coming into that range. I think that Rakhmonov could just, crowd the kicker in Stephen Thompson. I think he's going to get forward. I think he's going to land strikes on him. But then you've also got the wrestling and grappling as well, which we've seen as not so much earlier in Wonderboy's career, but recently there seems to be a massive decline in those specific areas. And opponents have got the better of Wonderboy, like Gilbert Burns beat Wonderboy that way. Bilal Muhammad beat Wonderboy that way. And look, if we were talking 5-6 years ago, I wouldn't be talking in that way because Wonderboy has, throughout his career, had decent takedown defense. He's had the ability to keep the fight standing. It's just recently, I don't know whether it is the age and the decline setting in, those specific areas now are potential big holes for Wonderboy. And the thing is with Rakhmonov, he's so dangerous there. Even prior to the takedown in the clinch, he's so good in the clinch. He's dominating elbows, knees. So I think that that's where Rakhmonov's going to have success here, by getting close to Wonderboy. But early on in this fight, I promise you, I don't think it's going to be that easy. I think Wonderboy is going to, open the eyes of Rakhmonov in regards to Rakhmonov realising that, holy shit, this is a very different but legit and elite striker that I've got in front of me. I think it's going to take a few moments for him to figure it out. And even if he can't figure it out and get counters going on Wonderboy striking, I think he just crowds it, put pressure, put aggression, get close to Wonderboy, close the distance with him, get into the clinch, elbows, knees, takedowns, and that's where I think that Rakhmonov is eventually going to start cutting through Wonderboy. But like I say, early, I think it's going to be a bit of a surprise for Rakhmonov. I think he's going to have some stuff to deal with, but I do think he deals with it. I'm picking Shavkat Rakhmonov to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a fun one. We've got the legend El Cucuy Tony Ferguson versus Paddy the Baddie Pimblett. Paddy Pimblett back after it was the injury, or it was a surgery, or maybe a combination of both. But Paddy Pimblett's back, and this is his first fight since that controversial Jared Gordon fight, which, I'll be honest, it still pisses me off. I had Jared Gordon as, I think it was a plus 200 or a plus 225 underdog. I thought that it should have been a pretty clear-cut 29-28, if I'm being honest. And, I know there's a lot of other people that say the same. In fact, you'd be very lucky to find somebody out there that does score the fight to Paddy Pimblett that's obviously not Paddy Pimblett or anybody associated to Paddy Pimblett, whether that be, training partners, gym, friends, all that sort of stuff. But I think everybody does agree that, look, Jared Gordon won that fight, even amongst fighters as well. So it's a bit of a tricky one with Paddy Pimblett, and I said this after the Gordon fight, because technically on paper Paddy Pimblett did win. So he has to have that step up in competition. But the thing is, he didn't beat, in my opinion, and a lot of other opinions, he didn't beat the previous competition. So it was a bit of an awkward one for UFC of how to match him. And I actually think they've done such a good job, because you've got Tony Ferguson that is technically that step up in competition from Jared Gordon, but it's also a fighter that is massively declining and nowhere near what he used to be. And it's a name as well for Paddy Pimblett to potentially, scalp on the night, on a big event, on a big pay-per-view, box office in the UK. So I actually think the UFC have done an amazing job with this fight. And look, I don't do this very often. In fact, I don't think I've ever done this before. Not that I can remember. But with this fight, I actually don't know who's going to win. I've legitimately got no idea. And look, if somebody is hyper confident of who wins this fight, whether it be Ferguson or Pimblett, then, you're a better man than me, because, like I said, I've never done this before, but I just don't know. Because the thing is with Paddy Pimblett, there's red flags there. He's coming off an injury, surgery as well, I believe, but a long layoff. And he's coming into this fight from a lot of controversy from his last fight, a fight that most people thought that he'd lost, but then he did win. And then with Tony Ferguson, Tony Ferguson has declined massively, is nothing like what he used to be, but at the same time, this is a massive step down in competition for him compared to what he's previously been fighting. He's been getting destroyed by the guys at the top of the division on his decline, but now he's got a way better matched fight than what he had previously in, his last, say, 3 or 4 fights, fighting the likes of, your Charles Oliveira's, who ended up becoming a champion, and even Bobby Green, that's just dangerous. I know Bobby Green didn't, do too well last time out against Jalen Turner, but, he knocked out Grant Dawson prior to that. So Tony Ferguson has really been fighting the best of the best, and now he's not. So this is what I mean. You put it all together, and it's I think, again, it's just a very unpredictable fight in regards to what's going to happen. Now, in regards to how I think the fight might play out is, look, Tony Ferguson should probably have the better jiu-jitsu here, but does he have the wrestling to get Paddy Pimblett down at this stage in his career? I'm not too sure. But then even with the striking, Tony Ferguson didn't look horrific against Bobby Green, and now he's got a step down in competition. I think that Ferguson might have the better technical striking, but the thing is with Paddy Pimblett, he's going to have that youthful energy, and that might be what takes Paddy Pimblett over the line here and gets him the win, because Pimblett's going to be younger, he's going to be hungrier, he's going to be having the crowd on his side, he's going to be more energetic inside the cage. I think he's going to be more athletic at this point in his career. I think he's going to be a little bit faster as well. So where the fight is unpredictable from a technical analysis perspective, when you start looking at, like I say, that youthful energy, the younger fighter who's, like I say, going to be, enthused by the crowd and, coming back off an injury, he's going to be eager to get back in there, and it's probably going to have pissed him off all this time, knowing, or at least hearing people talking about that fight against Jared Gordon as well, coming in with a point to prove. Yeah, it's a real tough one. I'm not confident at all when it comes to this fight, but for the sake of the pick and the prediction, I am going to side with Paddy the Baddy Pimblett to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is an interesting fight for so many reasons. We've got Vicente Luque versus Ian Machado Garry. And the first reason why it's interesting is because they're former trading partners. So deep down in the gym, only people in the gym will know exactly what went down with these two guys when they sparred, when they rolled, grappled, and put it all together. I do believe, and I always say this, that in these types of high-level fights, one person will have been getting the better of the other. And this happened, a couple of years ago with Kamaru Usman and Gilbert Burns. And, the same thing, everybody's like, oh, but Gilbert Burns' jiu-jitsu's elite, and if Usman tries to take him down, then he's going to be in his world. And I said the same thing at the time, and it's actually ironic as well, because it's from the same gym that they were training partners as this fight with Luque and Garry. And I said at the time with Usman and Burns, everybody in the gym knows how that fight is going to go down, and only those people know how it's going to go down. And we saw how it went down, and I would imagine that everybody in the gym knew what was going to happen, or had a very good idea of what was going to happen. I think the same thing here. The one thing that I am going to say straight off the bat is there's going to be a lot of people talking fight week about Ian Garry and the stuff that Sean Strickland said about his wife and, the family and stuff like that. I do not give a shit about that sort of stuff. That's not my business. That's one fighter just trying to wind up another fighter. I don't think it has any effect on the outcome of this fight whatsoever. I think that Ian Garry, although, some people are saying that he's soft, and he's come out, and apparently there's media saying that he's concerned about, the well-being of it, his family coming over to Vegas for this fight. It isn't just... He's got a bulletproof mindset, in my opinion. You can tell that. I don't think it's going to affect him in the cage whatsoever. So anything that's being said outside of, MMA and fighting with Garry, it doesn't make an iota of difference to me. I think Ian Garry's going to piece Luque up in this fight. I think that, look, Luque's dangerous. with his wrestling that looks like it's getting better. You know, the grappling is where Luque's base was in MMA, and he just developed into this savage striker. But I think Garry's going to be taller, he's going to be longer, I think he's going to be slightly faster, whereas Luque's putting more power behind his shots. Garry will just pop straight shots out there, whether that be, you know, the jab, the 1-2 combination, the teep kicks. I think Garry's just got to be mindful of what happened in the Kenan Song fight, where Song dropped him. I think it was a moment of a lack of concentration from Garry, which does happen to every fighter, and Garry got caught, but he wasn't finished, and he came back and ended up finishing Song as well. So, as always, credit where credit's due. You've got to, you know, admire the fact that Garry was hurt and not only recovered, but came back to finish his opponent as well, which is always a good sign. If Garry stays out of those hard shots from Luque coming in, and he's very, you know, he minds his P's and Q's in regards to his striking defense, I think he absolutely pieces Luque up. I think he's the better quality striker. I'm struggling to see Luque taking him down and controlling Garry as well. Garry's got good defensive wrestling. He can get back up to his feet. I think it's a fight that's going to be won and lost on the feet striking. And like I say, I think that Garry's just going to have so much success in this fight. The longer it goes on, I think the more he pieces Luque up. And it's probably going to be one of those fights where, you know, if we get into the third round, you know, Luque's landed a couple of good shots himself, but ultimately, he's busted up, blooded up, and, you know, there's some very red visuals on his face. I think that's the type of fight we're going to have here. So for those reasons, I'm picking Ian Machado Garry to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a fun fight and a short notice one for one side as well. We've got Josh Emmett versus Bryce Thug Nasty Mitchell. Now, this was supposed to be Josh Emmett versus Giga Chikadze. I think that Giga Chikadze tore his groin or something last week and, you know, pulled out the fight, wanted to rebook it in January, I believe, but the UFC want to keep Josh Emmett on this card. Bit annoying, I was going to bet Josh Emmett as an underdog against Giga Chikadze as well, but in steps Bryce Mitchell. Very different matchup, very different opponent for Josh Emmett, and one that I do think Josh Emmett's going to have difficulty with. And again, like I said with Wonderboy Thompson in this breakdown, if this fight was, you know, 3-4 years ago, it would be a very different breakdown, but I kind of feel that Josh Emmett is getting up there in age. I think you're starting to very slowly see the decline with him as well. It's not like massive, and like I say, you know, he's coming off the Ilia Topuria loss, which Topuria is an absolute savage. Most fighters are going to lose to him. And Josh Emmett, to be fair to him, stayed in that fight. He got hit with some hard shots. He didn't once quit on himself or anything like that. So you've got to pay the respects to Emmett for that. But the thing is with Bryce Mitchell, it's going to be very different here. Bryce Mitchell is going to be a fighter that's looking to take Josh Emmett down. I think if Mitchell tries to stand in front of Josh Emmett, he's going to give Emmett every opportunity of knocking him out. And I think Emmett will drop Bryce Mitchell and hurt him if Mitchell stays up on his feet for long periods of time. It's just I don't think Mitchell's going to do that. And that's where it becomes a difficult fight stylistically. Because, look, Josh Emmett can wrestle. His defensive wrestling's good. He's also very thick. He's well built for the division. He's got power. He's going to be strong. But I still think Mitchell's got the technique on his takedowns to be able to get Emmett down. And as Emmett's either trying to stand back up to his feet, and again, that's going to be something that I think Bryce Mitchell's going to be able to take advantage of. But also Josh Emmett, I could also see a scenario where he's just struggling to get up full stop, and Bryce Mitchell's just doing really good work on top. I think the top side grappling of Mitchell is going to be levels above the defensive grappling that Emmett's going to be able to bring to the table here. And that's where I think the difference is going to be in this fight. Like I say, if Mitchell tries standing in front of Josh Emmett and makes this a kickboxing fight, I think he's going to get dropped at the very least. He could end up, you know, getting his chin put into Rosa. But I think Mitchell's smarter than that. Especially on short notice, I think he does go for the takedowns. I think he does get Emmett down. I think Emmett's going to struggle to work off his back. If he does try and stand back up, I think he probably shows his back. I think Mitchell then takes her back. I'm struggling to see Emmett being able to, you know, stop that offensive grappling of Bryce Mitchell. Maybe in the early moments of this fight, Mitchell might have a little bit of difficulty to taking Emmett down due to the movement of Emmett, the physical size of him, and the fact that he's got a wrestling background himself. But eventually I think he gets at him, and I think as long as he just keeps on rinsing, repeating the takedowns in those early moments, so he's not standing with Emmett for too long, I think he's fine. So for those reasons, I'm picking Bryce Mitchell to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Irene Aldana versus Karol Rosa. And it's an interesting fight. I think that we've got Irene Aldana, who's going to be light years the better striker. I think Karol Rosa potentially the better grappler. But then it comes down to the wrestling. And I just don't think that Rosa's going to have enough there to be able to take Aldana down at will and take her down with regularity as well. And even when Aldana does get down to the mat, I know she was controlled by, like, for example, the Holly Holm, but Holly Holm's a completely different level to Karol Rosa. So I think that Aldana's going to be able to do enough here to be able to defend takedowns, or if she is taken down by Rosa, I think she can get back up to her feet. And then whilst they're on the feet, I think Aldana's the quicker, sharper boxer. Doesn't pack too many kicks in there, but like I say, I think that she's going to be able to, just use the jab and just use her boxing fundamentals to keep Rosa on the end of her strikes. It's then going to make it difficult for Rosa to get inside and take it down. And at that point, the fight starts slipping away from Rosa with Aldana pulling away with the fight herself. Yeah, I think it's going to be a fight where Aldana does good work defensively from a wrestling and grappling perspective, keeps the fight on the feet for long enough periods to make the fight won and lost within the striking, and that's where Aldana's going to have the advantages with her boxing. So for those reasons, I'm picking Irene Aldana to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Cody Garbrandt versus Brian Kelleher. It's a very interesting fight, but it's also a well-matched fight as well, and I do believe this is the first fight that new UFC matchmaker that Dana White hired. I think this is his first match that he made, and to be fair, it's a match that absolutely makes sense. I don't think at this point you should be throwing in a fighter that has got like insane knockout power against a Cody Garbrandt, because we know what the outcome's going to be. And on the flip side, Brian Kelleher, up there in age, I think he's declining. He's still got a dog inside of him for sure, but he's not going to be that dangerous, that ultra dangerous threat that's going to cause Garbrandt like real scary moments inside the cage. And I'm not saying Kelleher can't knock Garbrandt out. He's just, not a Davison Figueiredo or a Rob Font. And it's very interesting when you look at both the fighters' recent previous fights. Like Brian Kelleher, his only 3 wins in the last 3 years have been against Ray Rodriguez, Domingo Pilate, and Kevin Kroom, which, 3 fighters that aren't UFC caliber fighters, in my opinion. I'm not saying they're not good fighters, but at this level in the UFC, and I'm not sure if all of them have even been cut from the UFC as well. So from Brian Kelleher's perspective, no real great wins in the last 3 years. But then you look back at Garbrandt, obviously we know the story Garbrandt, the chin's gone, getting knocked out constantly. But again, you look at the fighters that he's been losing against, and they're the fighters at the top of the division. And then you look at the last 2 wins that he's had, and you're looking at Rafael Assunção, who again is a decline fighter but still an okay fighter. And then last time out, Trevin Jones again, low volume. I kind of feel like that was a fight that Trevin Jones could have probably won if he'd just been active and explosive, just because he's got the power to cause Garbrandt issues. But again, you've got to hand that to Garbrandt. He handled that fight really well and did what he needed to do, landed a ton of volume. And like I said, it's a really well-matched fight to where both fighters are in the career, but I do think it favours a comeback for Garbrandt here. And when I say comeback, I know he won last time out against Trevin Jones, but I mean, this is a comeback in regards to putting a win streak together again. And I think that Brian Kelleher is going to be able to offer a good opponent for Garbrandt. I think he's going to be... Listen, Brian Kelleher's well-rounded. He's a good, decent striker. He's a decent wrestler, decent grappler. It's just I think Cody Garbrandt's a much better striker. I think he's a much better wrestler. I think he's a much better grappler. So when I'm looking at where does Brian Kelleher get at Cody Garbrandt, well, I think that Kelleher's got the opportunity to knock him out, and that's pretty much it. I don't think Kelleher can out-wrestle Garbrandt. I think Garbrandt could use his offensive wrestling in this fight himself. I don't think Kelleher's jiu-jitsu is going to cause a massive threat for Garbrandt at all. Garbrandt, again, has got some good jiu-jitsu himself. And then, like I say, from your striking perspective, if Garbrandt comes in here and starts winging bombs and wild hooks and Kelleher finds that counter, then yeah, that's Kelleher's path to victory. But it's a glorified puncher's chance, and I think that Cody Garbrandt is just technically more skilled and better in all the areas of mixed martial arts than Brian Kelleher, and that should carry him over for a win. So for those reasons, I'm picking Cody Garbrandt to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Casey O'Neill versus Ariane Lipski. And there's contrasting differences here when it comes to public perception of both fighters, at least in the recent, last couple of years. So with Ariane Lipski, she came into the UFC a number of years ago, massive hype on her, didn't materialise, lost a ton of fights, probably was almost cut as well, but, ended up winning a couple against lower level competition and then should have the step up and lose again. Then she's trading wins and losses. And actually her last 2 fights, she's had 2 really, really good wins against JJ Aldrich and Melissa Gatto, which I'm sure, and again, I'm not 100% sure for myself, but I believe I picked against Lipski in both of those fights. And I'd imagine a lot of people did as well. And Lipski's come through and she's on back-to-back wins, a 2-fight win streak in fights where, her being the underdog and, shouldn't have won the fights according to the bookies. Then you look at Casey O'Neill, a ton of hype with her coming in. Everyone's getting really excited about Casey O'Neill. And then she has that step up in competition last time out against Jennifer Maia and gets beat comfortably. So now maybe that hype's dropped off a little bit. But again, Jennifer Maia is a difficult fighter to beat. And, would Lipski beat Jennifer Maia? I don't think so. I think Maia's still one of these veterans that's just going to be tough to get the better of. And Casey O'Neill did have that, that experience where she fights a veteran and comes up short. And again, most fighters do that. Lipski's had it herself. So now we've got an interesting fight here where maybe there's more hype on one side due to recent performances against a fighter that was hyped, that lost last time out. But I think that where Ariane Lipski struggles is against fighters that won't go away, that will keep coming forwards, that will walk through the strikes, that will land hard strikes themselves whilst being ultra aggressive, pressuring and putting, the opponent on the back foot. And that's exactly what Casey O'Neill does. But then with O'Neill, she's got some wrestling, she's got good jiu-jitsu as well. And although I think that maybe Lipski's the better technical striker, I think Lipski's going to be at a disadvantage in regards to the physical nature of this fight. I think she's going to be on the back foot more often than she's not, and that's going to allow Casey O'Neill to really put some good volume on, be really aggressive, look really exciting on the night. And like I say, if the fight hits the mat, I think that Casey O'Neill's the better grappler as well. So I do think that it's a difficult fight for Lipski. She's got to force that forward pressure on O'Neill, but O'Neill just won't give it up. And if Lipski tries, I think O'Neill will just meet her in the middle. Again, when O'Neill is overwhelming her opponents, that's where I feel that Lipski could potentially get overwhelmed as well. So even if Lipski does come forwards, O'Neill meets her in the middle. I think O'Neill still overwhelms her and then forces Lipski on the back foot. And I think that's the pattern that we're going to see in this fight. And for those reasons, I'm picking Casey O'Neill to win this fight. In the next fight, we've got big boys in the UFC light heavyweight division with power. We've got Alonzo Menifield versus Dustin Jacoby. And it's a really interesting fight because, look, the fight is going to be won and lost on the feet. If it's not, I'll be stunned because both fighters are predominantly strikers. I think maybe Menifield maybe he's a slightly better wrestler and grappler. But again, you're really clutching at straws with that. I think the fight's going to be won and lost on the feet. Now, Dustin Jacoby, in my opinion, is the much better technical striker. Where Alonzo Menifield might have successes, for as powerful and explosive as Menifield is, he does really like just clinching up all the time. Like, even when he's got a big striking advantage over his opponent, he closes the distance, clinches up, uses strength, beats his opponent up a little bit on the cage, tries not to work too hard that he gasses himself out because he's got a very muscular physique. So once the arms start being overworked, you'll then start seeing him tire a little bit, and it's pretty standard with somebody that's that big. So I think that Menifield is going to want to close the distance here. At range, I think Jacoby's the better technical striker by a mile. The thing is, like I say, with Menifield, he's got that equalizer with his power. He does have like crazy power, and like I say, I feel like even if he goes into the clinch in this fight, that might be where he wants to go. But I think Dustin Jacoby's got that K1 experience with the kickboxing, the tie, the elbows, the knees, and I think that Jacoby's going to be more dangerous in the clinch if that's where Menifield wants to take it. I think Menifield's best chance of beating Jacoby here is boxing range. I think that's the range. If he stands on the outside, I think Jacoby picks him apart. If he comes too far in the clinch, I think Jacoby is going to be better in the clinch. At boxing range is where Menifield's really going to give himself a chance of winning this fight. And look, Jacoby can get a hit, and this is something that does concern me with Jacoby here. Because if Menifield cracks him, he can absolutely knock him out. it's just like I say, when I'm looking at the quality of the striking of Jacoby against the quality of striking of Menifield, I do think there's a gap in skill there, and in a fight that I believe is won and lost on the feet as well, that does lean me towards Jacoby. Then when I'm looking at the ranges in this fight, I think Jacoby's better in slightly more ranges than Menifield. So yeah, it's definitely a scary one if you're siding with Jacoby in this fight, just because of the power of Menifield and the fact that he is an absolute unit in there. You know, it's going to be scary if you side him with, if you bet in Jacoby here. But I do think Jacoby's just the better fighter, and the fighter stylistically that has a favourable matchup in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Dustin Jacoby to win this fight. And in the next fight, I think this is going to be a really good scrap. We've got Tagir Ulanbekov versus Cody Durden. Now, it's mind-blowing that Cody Durden is on a 4-fight win streak, being or closing as the underdog in all 4 of those fights. There's been absolutely no market overcorrection. There's been absolutely no recency bias in the lines or anything. He's just remained an underdog for all those last 4 fights. On the last one, I capitalised on it. I did take him as an underdog against Jake Hadley in a fight that, you know, Durden actually almost got subbed as well. Like, you could tell that it was very, very tough. And aside from that, Durden did a really good job against a really good fighter, a really good grappler, and a good striker. Jake Hadley's the complete package, and Durden looked great against him. And like I say, from biting down and, you know, fighting through that real tough submission attempt, you can't give anything but props to Cody Durden. And then he comes into this fight against Ulanbekov, and he's the underdog again for the 5th straight fight. And look, I do kind of get it in this fight, like, and it was the same with Jake Hadley. Jake Hadley, your Ulanbekovs, it's really tough. You're really going to find it very rare for bookies to give those guys underdog status because of who they are and the hype around them. And like I said, I feel like if Ulanbekov was the underdog in this fight, he'd have just been absolutely steamed on until he was the favourite anyway. So yeah, I don't think Durden couldn't be anything other than the underdog in this fight. But at the same time, like, stylistically, I don't think it's a bad fight for him. Like, Ulanbekov, of course, he trains around the guys of like Khabib and Islam Makhachev and all the Nurmagomedovs that are at like AKA and stuff like that. So he's got all those Dagestani Russians around him. He's a Dagestani Russian himself, but I just don't think he's that dominant in regards to the wrestling and grappling. And look, against a certain level of opponent, he absolutely will be. But I just don't think that he's the beast wrestler that some of his training partners are, and the beast grappler that some of his training partners are, and also, you know, the striker that some of his training partners are. We've seen Ulanbekov, like, Tim Elliott dropped him, and look, Tim Elliott, I think that was the first time he dropped an opponent in absolutely years. Like, we're talking like years and years, like numerous fights. Tim Elliott's not known for his power. He dropped Ulanbekov. He beat Ulanbekov as well. He took him down numerous times also. And then you look at Bruno Bulldog Silva. He took Ulanbekov down numerous times. So for as good as an offensive wrestler as Ulanbekov is, his defensive wrestling does lack a little bit, and he can be taken down. From a grappling perspective, Tim Elliott did a good job. I think that Durden is a very high-level MMA grappler himself. Then when you look at the striking, Ulanbekov is very, you know, binary in regards to, you know, it's the straight shots down the middle, the 1-2 combinations, and, you know, he doesn't really take too many angles or anything like that. Whereas Cody Durden, again, I think is probably the very slightly better striker. The thing is with Ulanbekov is if he comes into this fight with an offensive wrestling game, I do think he can get at Durden. And I think Durden might tire in that type of fight if he's the one having to defensively wrestle, as he's so used to being the fighter that offensively wrestles. But the thing is, for Ulanbekov to do that and be offensive, he's got to push Durden back. And Durden's just so aggressive with his forward pressure and relentlessness. And the fact that I do think he's going to be the slightly better striker in this fight, I think that it's going to be Durden forcing the action forwards. And therefore, I don't think Durden's going to have any respect for Ulanbekov's Dagestani wrestling. I think Durden's going to think, fuck you. He's going to level change and look to try and take him down and prove that he's the better wrestler. And when he's on top, I think he's going to be the better grappler. So it's going to be a battle of the wrestling. I think whoever gets there first in this fight is going to have the most success. And I know that's a bit of a cliche, but I genuinely think that whichever fighter is the better offensive wrestler is going to be the one that wins the fight. But to be the better offensive wrestler, you're going to have to be the slightly better striker and force your opponents backwards. And I think that's where Ulanbekov's going to come unstuck. When you're looking at raw wrestling, I think Ulanbekov is the better offensive wrestler. But you've got to give that better offensive wrestler the right positioning to be able to use the wrestling and, take advantage of that gap in skill. And I just don't think he's going to have those moments at least often enough. And then when the fight hits the mat, you're looking at who's the better grappler, and I think that's actually Durden. So it's a really interesting fight, really close and competitive fight. I think both fighters are absolutely going to have the moments, but that forward pressure and the relentless style of Cody Durden, and the fact that we've now seen on numerous occasions that he's got 3 rounds of hard work in him with his gas tank and cardio, with that relentless style. Yeah, I'm siding with Cody Durden for this fight. So I'm picking Cody Durden to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fun one that I feel has really been flying under the radar because of how good this card is. We've got Andre Fili versus Lucas Almeida. And this could, like I said, this could be a really, really good fight. Or maybe it could be a really simple fight if that's what Fili wants. Because, look, Almeida's a very dangerous striker. He's got power, he's explosive. He's a good fighter from a striking perspective. I've said this numerous times with him before. I kind of wish that he'd move over to an American top team maybe. And again, that's no disrespect to where he's training at the minute. It's just, it looks like he's training in garages and stuff in Brazil. And I say garages as a bit of a metaphor, but, he's not training in full gyms that look like they're built to a very high standard with the high level training partners and coaches and all that sort of stuff. So I kind of think Almeida would benefit from, seeing a slightly bigger gym with higher level training partners, better coaches. So yeah, I think Almeida's got all the ability to be a great fighter, but I kind of feel he's restricted himself a little bit. But he still has that powerful striking, good Muay Thai, good kicks, power in both hands. And Fili's got to be careful of that because we saw what happened when Joanderson Brito came in with this, crazy explosive Brazilian style of fighting, and Brito absolutely went straight through Fili and knocked him out. So Fili's got to be careful, but the thing is, Almeida's got holes within his wrestling and grappling, and that's where I think Fili's going to be able to give himself a second path to victory, because from a striking perspective, I think Fili's the more technical striker. It's just Almeida's going to, whilst Fili's striking with Almeida is going to give him every opportunity for Lucas Almeida to be successful and knock him out. But even still, I think if it's a 15-minute kickboxing fight, if Fili doesn't get caught too much, I think he beats Almeida anyway. But then where the second path to victory comes in here is within the wrestling and grappling. Fili's a really underrated wrestler, a really underrated grappler, and I think that if he shoots takedowns in this fight, he's going to get them. I think if he pins Lucas Almeida down in regards to both shoulders on the mat, for example, I think he keeps him down. And he could potentially finish him on the mat as well. So I think there's a massive gap in skill with the wrestling and grappling. Striking very close. Maybe finishing upside for Almeida. Technical upside for Fili. So the striking's close, but with the technical ability that Fili's got on the feet, the experience, and then you add the wrestling and grappling into it as well, I think it's a good fight for him. So for those reasons, I'm picking Andre Fili to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the really big boys, the 265-pounders in that heavyweight division. We've got the newcomer Shamil Gaziev versus Martin Buday. And I actually really like this fight. I think it's a well-matched fight. I think both fighters have got the strengths. I think they've both got red flags. And I think stylistically, it's just great. And the reason I like it stylistically, actually, is because you don't normally get heavyweight fighters where the best part of their game is within the wrestling and grappling. It's normally, the fighter's a beast striker and you can't get hit by him. And if the fighter starts hitting the mat, then, both fighters are going to be out of their element or anything like that. So with Gaziev's got really good wrestling and he's got a good topside game as well. But Martin Buday, I believe, is a BJJ brown belt. That's his base. That's where he started with MMA. So you've actually got wrestler versus grappler in the heavyweight division. But the thing is, in the heavyweight division, it is tough to wrestle and grapple too much, so the likelihood is we could see long periods of time striking here. And then from a striking perspective, you've got Buday, in my opinion, who's a slightly more technical striker, probably more volume as well, mixes things up a little bit more in regards to, the areas that he attacks, the body and the legs and the head, of course. But then you've got Gaziev that has got this absolute touch of death, like both hands as well. We saw Gaziev against Darko Stosic. And by the way, those that don't follow outside the UFC, Darko Stosic, yes, he didn't do great in the UFC and got cut, but he went to KSW, moved up a weight class, went on a win streak, had a title fight against Phil DeFries, and became an absolute killer. Darko Stosic was a really solid fighter when Gaziev beat him. Darko Stosic knocked Gaziev down. Gaziev got back up, came back, and then finished Darko Stosic, which, again, like I said earlier in the podcast, I can't remember which fighter it was for now. In fact, now it came back, it was Ian Garry. So seeing a fighter being dropped and hurt, especially at heavyweight, and able to get back up to the feet, continue to fight, recover, and then finish their opponent, it's impressive. So Gaziev, the way he knocked Stosic out was he just caught him with a lead left hook. And it was that, it didn't look like he put too much power into it. He didn't wind up on it. It wasn't a big winging bomb. It was just a nice short technical hook and absolutely deaded him. So the power that Gaziev has. And also you go back to the Contender Series fight as well. I think he landed like 4 strikes, but the first strike was on the feet. 1 strike was on the feet. He went in there, he landed 1 strike on his opponent, dropped him hard, and then finished him with 3 shots on ground and pound. So again, like, Gaziev is just, he has that touch of death for sure. So how this fight's going to play out is, like I said, it's interesting because, look, Gaziev's definitely got the power advantage, but if the fight goes 3 rounds and the majority of it's played out in the feet, then you've got to assume that Boudet is not being hit too much, because if he was hit too much, it wouldn't have gone 3 rounds, and therefore the volume's on his side as well. So you've got to assume that Boudet could potentially win a decision if it goes all 3. But then in regards to the wrestling and grappling, like, we have seen Boudet taken down, and it was Jake Collier that took him down, and Boudet just turtled up instantly. It was a horrific look, and Gaziev's actually really heavy on top. But then the issue with Gaziev comes that, look, if he can't take Boudet down, and he really wants to, then he's going to tire himself out. He's one of these fighters that, and again, you can't blame him at heavyweight, but he does tire out if he starts getting relentless with the wrestling, and then Boudet could take over late. Or Gaziev might be successful with wrestling, get Boudet down and get him out of there. So it's a real interesting fight. It could go many different ways in my opinion, but I do think if Gaziev gets on top of Boudet, Boudet is going to be in big trouble. I think whilst it's on the feet, I kind of think Boudet is going to be in big trouble in regards to he's got to mind his P's and Q's defensively. Because if Gaziev catches you, he's going to hurt you. Where Boudet is going to come in is if this fight goes late and he hasn't been taken down, or if he's defended a number of takedowns and he hasn't obviously been knocked out, then Boudet is probably the better fighter the longer it goes. So this is where it gets difficult, because we've seen it time and time again when heavyweights get tired and their opponent just really starts to take over once the fighter that's tired starts getting sloppy and can barely function. We've seen it a million times. So yeah, I think there's real upsides on either side here. But I am going to side with the fighter that I believe is the better wrestler. That's got a real heavy top game, that's got good ground and pound, and has got that touch of death, especially in the heavyweight division. So for those reasons, I'm picking Shamil Gaziev to win this fight. And finally, we get to the 14th fight. We've got Randy Brown versus Muslim Salikov. And I think that, look, from a technical striking perspective, and look, I do think this fight is going to be won and lost on the feet. Salikov doesn't really use his, wrestling and grappling. His background's in striking. You can see that. If he is taken down, he's got a decent defensive wrestling game. He can stand back up to his feet. Randy Brown, again, he's more of a striker himself. He's tall, he's long. I think for him to actually get down at the hips to take Salikov down might be difficult. If he does take Salikov down, it'd probably be through, like, maybe inside-outside trips in a clinch. But then, like I say, although Randy Brown's a good grappler, I see the better work being done on the feet. And although I believe that Muslim Salikov, even at his age, is still the better technical striker here, Randy Brown's going to have a big height advantage. I think it's like an 8-inch reach advantage as well. I think he's going to be more athletic. He's going to be slightly faster. His movement's going to be slightly better. And I think it's going to be one of them where Salikov is plodding around the cage a little bit and Randy Brown's just darting left and right, lateral movement, in and out of range, landing shots at different ranges. He's going to be good with elbows in close. He's not going to have to get as close as other fighters to land elbows and knees. From the outside, he can pick Salikov apart as well. I think Salikov, for him to do good work in this fight, is going to have to work harder than Randy Brown in regards to just being able to get inside of range, and work harder than he has to in other fights against fighters that are shorter. Because when a fighter's shorter and not as long, it's easier to close the distance. But against Brown, again, with his movement as well, I just think it's a difficult fight for Salikov to really get a grasp of and start to take it to Brown and maybe start to pull away with a fight. I just don't see Salikov being able to do that here. I do think it's good. It's a good fight. Not so much stylistically, but definitely from a physical perspective. Like I say, the younger fighter, taller, longer, better movement speed. It's going to be difficult for Salikov, in my opinion. So for those reasons, I'm picking Randy Brown to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast, and that'll be it for 2023 as well, as sad as that sounds to say. There won't be another UFC event, therefore there won't be another breakdown podcast until the new year. So for those that have been listening all year, or even if you're a new subscriber and you've subscribed to the YouTube channel and you've dropped comments and stuff, look, I appreciate everything that everybody's done throughout the year, even if it's just a like to the video or the comments or just tuning in. Like, thank you for supporting the channel. It actually does mean more than you think. So for everybody listening right now, for those that have tuned in, I wish you all, your family, your friends, a very Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and I'll see you all back in 2024.